Hey everyone! Today we're going to talk about how to say the years in English. I'm going to start with the most common way to say the years, and afterwards we'll look at some special cases that I've seen some of my intermediate students struggle with. So hopefully this video will be helpful for people with different levels of English. So looking at the most common way to say the years in English, 95% of the time we talk about years after the year 1000. So let's look at this first. The trick is to cut the year in half. Let's look at this year. Just cut it down the middle, and then you read the two separate numbers. So 1425. Let's do another example. Again, cut it in half, and we get 1980. Pretty easy, right? Now, where I've seen my intermediate students struggle is when they have to say the years in the first 9 years of a century. If we apply the same technique from before, we cut the year in half, and we get 1903. Good try, but this is incorrect. If we have 4 numbers in our year, and the third number is a 0, we show that it is there by saying O. So, our example is actually said like 1903. Let's look at another example. We cut the number in half, and we get 1709. But what happens when there are 2 zeros at the end of our year? This is where things start getting a little crazy. We don't say 1300 or 1300. That would be too easy, right? In this case, we have to convert our thousand number into hundreds. So, this year is 1300. This year is 1200. We often add the year before to make it clear that we are talking about years. For example, the year 1200, the year 1300, and so on. Sometimes you might hear someone convert a year to hundreds that doesn't end in 2 zeros. For example, the year 1425. However, this sounds very old-fashioned and very formal, and it's much less commonly used than the other way to say years. So, I would discourage anyone learning English from using it, but it's good to know in case you ever hear it or read it. Since it's English, we need some kind of exception to this rule. We don't use this structure for years that end in 3 zeros. So the year 1000, the year 2000, and so on. Because of this, the first 9 years after the year 2000 are said a little differently from what we learned before. We don't say 2001. Instead, you must say the year exactly like you would say the number. So 2001 or 2001. Another example, 2008 or 2008. Once we get to the year 2010, we can switch back to how we said years before. So 2010, 2020, and so on. An important note, in the case of the years after 2009, we can use both the cutting in half method or saying the whole number. Both are equally acceptable, and you should use whichever one is easiest for you. Now let's look at the years before the year 1000. Again, for clarity, we often add the year before to make sure our listeners know that we are talking about years. We most often say these years by saying the whole number. For example, the year 340 or the year 608. However, you might sometimes hear people using the cutting in half method, but since there are only 3 numbers, the cut goes after the first number. So, the year 533 could be said like the year 533. Or the year 205 becomes the year 205. If the number is under 100, then you just say the number. So the year 14 or the year 99, pretty easy, right? Sometimes when we're talking about history from long, long ago, we might need to use BC, AD, BCE, or CE. BC stands for before Christ. AD stands for Anno Domini. BC is used for years before 1 AD, and AD is used for years after 1 BC. Does that make sense? BCE stands for before the Common Era and is the equivalent of BC. CE stands for the Common Era and is the equivalent of AD. It's probably better to use BCE and CE because they're becoming much more common these days, especially in academic circles. But since you can still see both formats, it's a good idea to know how they're both used. Okay, that's it for now. Let me know in the comments if you liked this or if you found it helpful, and if you want to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.